and I'm going to bring on my guest today. Bam! And just like that, we have Mr. Erik Witt. How you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Henry.
Oh man, it is my pleasure. I do have to thank you because you're all the way in Germany. Whereabouts in Germany are you, by the way?
In Hamburg.
Okay, you're in Hamburg right now. I know it's let me see, it's like 7 p.m. Is that it?
Yeah, right about.
Well, thank you very much. You could be having dinner with your family, but instead you're hungry and you're hanging out with me. So but no, I do appreciate the time. So we're gonna have a great conversation today. Did we meet for the first time in Perth now a couple years ago? Is that when?
Yeah, I think in 2019, I think. 2019 was my first perf now, I think. And you, I think, had the first
Oh
talk
my God, I remember that.
where we met for the first time. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I remember that now because that was when I angered the community by saying that Lighthouse would have some significant say in performance, and people didn't
Oh,
believe me.
right.
They whistled like it was the French Open or something. I don't know, but yeah, we could talk about that another day. But I do remember meeting you and the rest of the team a few years ago, which was really interesting. And we'll get back to that in a hot minute. But let's get down to the nitty gritty. I'll sort of like say what I always say, which is I'm going to sit back. I'm going to hand over the keys. You're in control, but please, by all means, introduce yourself, who you are, where you work, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, my name is Erik. I work with web performance all day, every day, actually, because I'm working at SpeedKit as their VP product. Have done this for more than 10 years now as well. Yeah, we built a really cool web performance plugin, I would say, for mostly large e-commerce systems, but it essentially works for any website. So we are dealing with caching, web performance, real user data, real user monitoring data all day, and having a blast.
Nice, nice. And SpeedKit has been around. Actually, let me rewind for a second because I remember this conversation we had a while back. So there's SpeedKit and there's also a company called Backend. Is that correct?
Yeah, right. So the company itself is still called Backend, even though we more identify with SpeedKit as our main product.
Mhm.
So technically, it's still the company is called Backend, but SpeedKit is kind of front and center.
Got it. So SpeedKit is basically like the main product that you spend, your working days on.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Perfect. Now, and you said SpeedKit's been around 10 years or you've been in the space for 10 years?
Yeah, very similar. I think the the company was founded in 2014, so it's 11 years. I'm with it couple months more than 10 years. So yeah, really similar dates.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Now, let's get to one of my favorite questions that I like to start the stream with, and all my guests, which is the following. What do you remember when I ask what was your first contact with web performance? When was the moment where you decided that you wanted to spend some time working in this space and sort of like take your career there? Do you remember?
Mhm. Yeah, that's an awesome question. Um, I think it's kind of a longer story how I really ended up in web performance because I'm coming from kind of a research slash product side into the whole topic. I think it kind of started towards the end of my university. So when I finished up my master degree about like 11 years ago or so,
Mhm.
I was really into distributed systems and like NoSQL databases, reading all the research. And I mean, this is already kind of tapping into performance because like NoSQL is like those systems always try to do a specific use case, but faster and more resilient and on usually cheaper hardware than the big database systems. So this is already tapping into it. But yeah, we were essentially reading all the latest research and some really interesting, exciting papers. And in those seminars that I took there, I got to know the founders of SpeedKit, or the company backend back then. And they were also doing some really fascinating research in that area. And they had just launched the startup as well. So their main research was how to combine cloud database systems with web caching. And that was super interesting because it is quite a challenge, if you think about it, to have something like web caching that you can use for like mostly static content or something that doesn't change all that often, and you try to apply to something like database queries, which like they are super dynamic and change at any point in time. And yeah, you have to do a lot of research and development in order to get to something that is actually workable and actually a big improvement on top of cloud database systems. And that was super fascinating to me. And I readily joined their research, and also at that point then joined the company as the first employee. That was now 10.5 years ago, I think.
Wow.
That was really interesting time. So we did, on the one hand, a lot of research into this realm of web performance, and on the other hand, we tried to use that research and actually build a product out of it, to have something that people could actually use in order to make better software. And what we ended up building was a backend as a service platform. So something like Firebase, for example. And the unique point of that was it had kind of performance built in a way that we had developed these algorithms to cache dynamic content in web caches, and those were integrated into the APIs of the backend as a service. So you could essentially write your application against those APIs for data access and for standard APIs like what you need for your application, like authentication and so on. And they had this caching algorithms already built in, so your application became blazing fast this way. That was kind of the way that we brought all of that research that we did on the university level into practice over the years. And a really, really exciting project. Not like it's still very, very different from the web performance that we do right now, but it was already tapping into how can we build really fast applications on the web. Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of the first things that we did. Yeah.
Basically, as you completed your studies, you were exposed to the idea of, we'll say, fast. How do I make things fast or faster? And eventually that dominant theme was sort of maintained, and that brought you to where you're at right now.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of like, how can we use existing infrastructure in a new way to get much better performance out of what we already have? That was the main thing. And since it was such a complex problem, I got really, really hooked on it. And when we then started to build out the product and eventually kind of pivoted to what SpeedKit nowadays is, I was instantly in love with the whole project, I think.
That's awesome. Because as we discussed, over the sort of span of all these episodes, there's always been a really interesting, outlook in terms of how people get into performance. And, right now, you are the only person who's actually brought up the idea of, graduating into, performance from like an academic and, almost like scholarly level. Because again, I bring up, I brought up Tim Verreek, who just happened to be blogging, and the accolades that he got from some kind of like computer sort of like periodical who said, "Hey, this site is very fast." You know, actually, you know what? I'm going to correct myself because I remember now that Robin Marks, also who works with Tim, kind of came in through the academic level as well because I think he said something like, "Oh, he wasn't too sure what he wanted to do. He was almost done, school, and there was some kind of academic project around H2." And he was like, let me just do this for a year. And then that suddenly got him to sort of like deep dive into, everything, protocol H2 and obviously H3 now. And so I guess he kind of came from academics as well, now that I think about it. Anyhow, you're still special, sir. I think that was an amazing project when I first heard about it. The fact that it started on a university campus, the idea of SpeedKit eventually. So when we spoke and sort of like lead up to this, I guess we had been talking about a lot of the themes across some of my streams, or some of these streams had been about RUM, real user monitoring, and you approached me about a particular project that is just around 2 years now, and it's around real user monitoring, RUM, and machine learning. So sort of like tell us about that. How did that
Right.
get started?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to tie this together a bit, maybe I tell you first a little bit about how did we get from this backend as a service platform with all the caching algorithms to kind of a plugin approach like SpeedKit nowadays, because
Okay.
I think it explains well how we kind of then ended up with the machine learning part on that. So the big issue, or the the big challenge with kind of a backend as a service is, even though you deliver awesome performance in the end, your competition is extremely tough, right? So
Mhm.
having something like Firebase, for example, as a competitor is not so easy. And I think making such a platform big is, and building a community around it is like very resource intensive, I would say. So you need a lot of money in order to be successful with that. It didn't really stop us from trying, for sure. And the platform was really good and stable, and we started selling it as well. But we always had in the back of our heads that with a platform like this, people start building software on it, and then at some point you end up with really good, fast software, hopefully, that is in the hands of many users. But on the other hand, there were so many websites out there that could have used the technology that we now only kind of supported for newly built websites.
Mhm.
And that was always, always an issue for us, that we couldn't kind of go into those existing websites and help them. And the cool thing is that in 2017, I think it was, when service workers came around, because that was the main pivot point for us, both in research but also in the company. Because if you're not familiar with service workers, they are essentially a background thread in the browser of the user, which can intercept network requests and then do stuff with it, like caching strategies or rerouting traffic. And that essentially enabled us to use these algorithms and this platform that we already had and plug it into existing large websites. And then essentially, solve the performance problems that they were having for years now. And that was extremely exciting. And when service workers came around, we started prototyping instantly. And in 2018, actually launched the very first version of SpeedKit as kind of a performance plugin that brought these algorithms into existing websites. It was quite early, so really kind of early stage product. But I think it was also the best decision to launch very early and then learn on the customers, or with the customers together, because we learned so many things about how caching in the wild actually can be successful. And we built so many features around SpeedKit and so many more projects, like from how do we deal with personalization and still cache the whole page. I think this was extremely key to get into the e-commerce use cases.
Mhm.
And we have a solution that works extremely well right now.
Mhm.
But we also implemented our completely own view user monitoring stack also around 2018,
Mhm.
which was very important for us to showcase the performance benefit, to be able to, when we go into a customer, what we do, we always A/B test the solution so that they actually see in real user data how impactful the performance improvement is. And for that, we needed a real user monitoring setup that, on the one hand, gave us the visibility that we could share with the customer, but also to give us all the details on our caching infrastructure to be able to fine tune kind of every last bit of it. And
So here's a quick question before you keep going.
yeah,
So SpeedKit is a plugin. Is that what I've heard?
yeah, you can imagine it like you're integrating a piece of JavaScript into your page,
Mhm.
and usually it gets slower if you do that, but not with SpeedKit. So in that case, what happens is a service worker gets installed for the end user, and that takes over routing network traffic. And it uses our caching algorithms for dynamic data in order to actually cache the dynamic parts of the page. So your complete HTML file, for example. And then we have some mechanisms to make sure this is always up to date, and you always get the personalized content in there as well.
So SpeedKit is essentially a service worker plugin.
Yeah, we use the service worker to plug into a website. So
Got it.
unlike a CDN, you don't have to kind of change your DNS. You just install the service worker, and then we kind of enhance how the browser loads the resources for the website,
Mhm.
and thus, more or less eliminate the network bottleneck completely.
Mm. Now, something else that you mentioned that was interesting. You said that you, after launching, you were able to, some of your first clients, you were able to sort of work with them and learn with them along the way and really make discoveries in the wild. And I think the in the wild part was kind of like struck me because for this particular reason, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because there's always like an academic outlook solutions, kind of like, hey, A plus B equals C. And then we know that in the wild or rum, sometimes A plus B equals D.
Yeah.
Suddenly things are completely different. They don't go according to what the theory indicates. And I'm assuming that these are the kind of discoveries you've been able to make along the way with some of your earliest clients.
Absolutely. I think this is where something like a user monitoring system is key, because in the end, you want to do things that work and not only things that sound like they are a good idea. So you want to be data driven about this for sure. And we are extremely data driven when it comes to uh, product features, because in the end, all our customers care about is the page faster, and usually do we make more money with it. And those are the two things that we need to provide. And this means that only solutions that really work in the wild can stay.
And were there moments, and I don't want you to have to go back through history books or something like that, but were there particular moments where you were sure that a particular, I don't know, feature or something was going to work properly, and then a client came back and said, "Hey, I don't know what's going on here. This is not working." Like, did you have any such memories that you'd want to share?
I think like on the functional side, we had a lot of things like in the beginning, it was really hard to cope with personalization, and we found a really good match for that. But in terms of performance features, I think this also happens where we think something should have quite a good impact,
Mhm.
but it turns out in production that it doesn't. So what comes to mind for me is a lot of efforts into image optimization.
Mhm.
They often showed really mediocre effects on the core performance metrics. Even when the kind of the impact of the optimization on image level was quite nice, to see it in the end user performance was quite difficult. And similar to with things that we tried around third party caching and routing things through the same connection instead of multiple connections, I think there are a lot of things where you have to look at the data in the end and figure out, are you making sense, or is it just kind of a good or a bad idea in that instance?
Interesting. And but that's fantastic. And again, we always have these visions of what things should be like and what, actually happens. Um, Erwin Hoffman from Rum Vision, he's been running, I think, lately. And I told him I had a presentation once based on running because there's what we believe is going to happen after we train, and then what actually happens during the race. Often enough, completely different, and you won't know until you have that race to understand like how your body feels. So, anyways, I just brought that up because it was very recently discussed like a day or two ago. Let's get back on track here. So, we are on sort of like this path to get to this point where you are going to start to use machine learning around rum. So
Yeah.
now that you have like all this sort of information, you've collected rum data, like how did you start to get into the whole machine learning idea?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it was around 2.5 years back, where we really had a good market fit with the product. It was working really well for the websites that were using it, and we were getting really good results on performance. So if we essentially what SpeedKit does best is eliminate time to first byte and all the network barriers, I would say. This is kind of, especially in e-commerce, this is a huge leverage because those systems have quite intense processing in the backend often, and we can get well below 1 second LCP, which is already a great result, and well within kind of the positive, the green threshold from Google. But we were asking ourselves, like, this is good performance, no questions asked, but it's not really instant, right? So it's still wait time, and it still accumulates, and it's still, even within a second, you still feel the lag.
Yeah.
So can we get even faster, or how can we get even faster? And I think this is where we realized that we are pretty much like reacting to clicks. We are pretty much doing, from our perspective, everything that we really can. So we actually had to go from just reacting to clicks to anticipating them. So we needed to essentially know where the user will go next, or at least have a rough idea of that, in order then to prepare for that navigation that is coming. That was the idea, and I think we went straight away for that project because we essentially have a really strong basis already in order to tackle this. We already have the real user monitoring data. I think we have around like 400 million unique users per month
Wow.
that we see through this. So really drastic amounts of data. And we have the knowledge about like statistical models, about machine learning, because we're still really close to research and everything happening in the university. And we also had the measurement capabilities with RAM and A/B testing capabilities because we do this every day anyways. And I think most importantly, we had our caching system. Because one thing that was clear quite early on is you can't really attempt to predictively preload, or even now with speculation rules, pre-render stuff in the background without caching. At least it makes it like 10 times harder. Because if you would kind of just start to pre-render stuff, if you, for example, would just throw speculation rules onto a large e-commerce system, you would face a lot of issues around overhead, for example. Like you would potentially mess your server load up by I would say like 10 times the server load. That's usually not a good idea. We've seen systems break down under this additional load in the early days quite a lot. Plus, it can also be just prohibitively expensive if you have to now serve 10 times the load or pay 10 times the price potentially. And then, of course, this is only the server side. You also have an issue on the client side where the client all of a sudden becomes sluggish if you do too much in the background as well. And then you have the network level where you will definitely content with loading the next page if you're doing stuff in the background. And since we have this caching setup already in place, what we could do is, first of all, use our real user monitoring in order to build a really strong prediction system. We can touch on a few details as well, but then use the caching to do the actual background preloading. So we, for example, only preload if something is in the cache, which is working quite well because we have a really high cache hit rate with our system. And if it's not in the cache, it will not get pre-rendered in the background. And this essentially eliminates the whole server load issue.
Yeah.
We also are quite careful when it comes to the client. So we, for example, only execute JavaScript once the user actually navigates, because we've seen pages where there are 10 pages rendering or 8 pages rendering in the background, all executing React and rehydrating the DOM, that you cannot really use the page that you're currently on anymore, which really defeats the purpose, improving the user experience. So we don't do this by design as well. And we always measure the client load in A/B tests so that we make sure that the user experience never degrades on the current page just to be a bit faster on the next navigation. And I think like the last overhead is the network level. We're currently actually just rolling out compression dictionaries to cope with that, which is super interesting because you can essentially get another 80% compression on top of your HTML broadly compression that you may use, which for us means we can now just preload 5 to 10 times as much in the same network footprint, which is a really big enabler for us. We've done a lot of testing with this, so especially e-commerce HTMLs, I think, are very redundant. And if you've loaded one product detail page, all the others will look extremely similar.
Yeah.
They will all have the same category tree in your navigation and stuff in it. Only the images and text is a bit different.
Yeah. Yeah.
With compression dictionaries, you essentially only load what is different between the pages instead of loading everything. So there's a big enabler for pre-loading and pre-rendering as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, yeah. I'll have to sort of like resurface that info because it is quite the sort of like magic, really. You just mentioned a few things. I'm trying to figure out where to tackle it, what to bring up first. But you talked about fine-tuning your prediction systems or models. Like, how did you go about doing that?
We did a lot of iterations and a lot of A/B testing, because also there, only things that work in production are really helpful in the end. I think there are two very important aspects to the prediction, which is one, it should be as accurate as possible. And on the other hand, it should be as early as possible. Because if you only predict that someone clicks just before they click, you don't have enough time to really pre-render the page in the background and present it instantly within like 100 milliseconds. You really need the browser needs the time for that. So your prediction has to be early and it should be quite accurate. So those were the two goals. And we started out with just looking at our real user monitoring data, trying out statistical models first before actually tapping into machine learning. Things like Markov chains and variations of that. So just kind of evaluating the transition probability between URLs That is kind of the first thing, more or less, you think about and touch on. And we were always trying this against kind of more simple things like preloading on hover, or preloading when a link gets into
Yeah.
a specific spot on the mobile viewport, for example.
Right.
Those were the first tries, and you get some of the way, but definitely not good enough for our goals. So the system, how we do it right now, evolved over time, and what we do is essentially we divide it up into 3 different kinds of models and approaches that we have. One is actually derived from those transition probabilities and Markov chains. It's essentially a neural network trained on embeddings of the URLs, and can essentially say, okay, when you are on this URL, these are the most likely next URLs for you. But this is only kind of taking data into consideration, like where did users navigate. It is completely blind to what is currently going on for that particular user on his device. So we have a second model that actually looks into that. So it tracks a lot of data about the links and the usage on the device. And then on the backend side, we train a model that can essentially score all this metadata of links, like how large is it, where on the screen was it, how did the user scroll there, scroll speed, and essentially proximity to the last clicks and touches, and a lot of other stuff. And this model gets trained on the server side, and that gets shipped into the client. So the browser loads essentially an XGBoost model into the client, and then scores every visible link of the user against that model. And the cool thing is, this is just simple mathematics to execute this scoring, and this means the browser can do it so fast you're barely able to measure it. So it's really easy to execute it in the client once you've derived that model with training on the server side, and it performs extremely well. So it's really cool to see. Yeah, and then the third thing is heat maps on devices, but it's not as exciting as the.
It's like, oh, heat maps. Boo. That's been around for years. So, like, and again, I had a bunch of questions, but I want to get back to the scoring because, the the general belief, in performance right now, anywhere you go, people are like, oh, scores this, scores that, scores are bad, scores are bad. I'm like, no, they're not. Listen, like everyone's got their own score, and it means, what that score means to them is important. It's not necessarily like, hey, what's your score here? Because, volume 8 on my machine might mean volume 5 on yours. You know what I mean? So I think these scores are often very sort of like proprietary. That being said, when you have these scores that that SpeedKit is computing, what would a high score mean and what would a low score mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So the way that works, so you have to imagine we are tracking links that have not been clicked, and we are tracking links that have been clicked. And we are tracking a bunch of metadata about these links and how the user behaved essentially at that point. It's all anonymized data, so no privacy infringement there, but we essentially learning about how do users interact with the page. And with this data, we're essentially training a model because we're telling it, okay, this is how a link looks that wasn't clicked. This is how a link and a behavior looks that was clicked. And what it will then do is, generate a large network of decision trees, for example, where you can now where you essentially can feed in the metadata of a not yet seen link and user behavior, and it will then produce a score between 0 and 1. And the higher the score is, the more likely it is that the user will actually click on that. And then what you do is you define a threshold. Okay, above 80%, for example, I would say this is safe enough that we are going to preload this.
Mhm.
And this then depends on kind of what are your thresholds for limiting overhead. Are you using compression dictionaries? Then you can go a bit heavier. Are you executing heavy JavaScript after while pre-rendering? Then you should go a bit lower for sure, or a bit
Mhm.
higher with the threshold. But this is essentially how it works.
Hmm. Now, with the score, is this data that you're also sharing with a client? So for example, I don't know, Puma is your client and they're like, hey, can we look at, reports? Or when they look at their own reports, do they see this sort of, ML rum scoring?
Mhm. It's a good question. So right now we are only using it for predictive preloads, but a lot of customers, when they hear about how this works, they are thinking about, okay, can I use this for personalization? Can I use this for maybe not marketing, but yeah, personalization essentially? And that is a very interesting question, and we are definitely exploring kind of, is that a thing that makes sense, and is it a thing that what does it change about how the system works? But this is something that we're thinking about. But in theory, the customer has access to the model and also to the scoring and to the RAM data if they need it. Right now, we're using RAM data a lot internally and exposing not a lot, just because you first need to build a product around something like that.
Mhm.
That's a lot of work, but we're looking into that as well.
And, we talked about, it being a lot of work, and that's something I was going to get to as well, because whenever I hear anything predictive, it's like, hey, we're doing predictive preloading, we're doing predictive this, we're using machine learning to determine, where they're going to go next. I'm assuming this has to happen, or the training has to happen over a significant period of time. So you have this data to be like, okay, this is what we've discovered over 8 months of 400 million unique visits a day. Here's what's going to happen. So, how long did that take for it to sort of like give yourself uh, a base of data points that you can like, okay, we're going to train everything off this now, and we are confident in making these predictions. Like, how long did that period take?
It actually depends on the model. So, for,
Mm.
for example, this client-side model that I mentioned that is shipped into the browser, it needs less data or less time, I would say, than the server-side model that uses those URL embeddings, because that is just it's a much more complicated model. That's also why it's only executed on server-side. It can never be shipped to the client side. It's
Mm.
way too big for that. But the client-side model, it does use less data. So I think with a month of data, we're usually fine, and it depends a bit on how the traffic of the website is.
Interesting. And, you just mentioned again, a month of data is more or less fine, but what if that month spans across something, say, like Black Friday, where
Mhm.
you might have just like unusually high spikes of traffic? And then, we know that 2 months after that, January, things are pretty flat. Like, do you take that in consideration?
The amount of data fluctuating is not that big of a deal. What needs to be taken into consideration is when the user behavior or the layout of the page changes drastically. And this is
Mhm.
essentially where definitely the model needs to retrain, or some um, yeah, fallback mechanisms need to be in place to also still capture the still make a prediction in those cases where the model is a bit out of date. But we do train models, I think, once a week by default, or if we detect larger changes to the structure or the layout of the page.
Hmm. Here's another question, sir. I hate to be like that, but because I'm just thinking right now. So you just talked about user behavior,
Yeah.
and if there are changes in user behaviors, this is where things become like you have to make sure you do a bit more training. Have you segmented user behavior with this model between what would you call it? Particular devices? Because I'm only assuming that an iPhone 17 Pro Max user may have different behavior than someone on an Alcatel, and I'm assuming this is something that you sort of keep in consideration as well.
Yes, absolutely. So the cool thing is about these models,
Hmm.
you can easily kind of add a layer like that. And for example, you could either use something that identifies the device, but this is a bit difficult in machine learning because you need more or less yeah, numeric data. So you can, for example, use something like the screen height and width, which is identifying quite well the different kinds of devices. So your iPhone Pro Max for sure. Maybe not the distinction between 16 and 17, but I think that's still fine. And if this is fed into the model, it can learn these distinctions between, okay, this kind of a device um, tends to behave this way. This kind of a device tends to behave in another way.
Okay, and I see exactly where you're going there because sometimes, and quite often, screen size, density, these things tend to be uh, identifying specs, of particular devices. So I could imagine that that certainly comes into play. This fascinating, because again,
It is.
I remember the idea of like predictive anything, and I'm like, okay, we're going from very low latency to trying to get zero latency, and now we're almost trying to get negative latency. Like we're trying to predict where things are going to go, which I always found fascinating. But as you said right now, the way things are going, with this predictive model, so much more could be done. Here's another question. Say, let's rewind to 5 years ago. Why was this not possible, say 5 years ago, or
Mhm.
before?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Um, I think parts of it were possible for sure. Um, like the prediction part, I think not much has changed there. So you could still kind of perform the same predictions on older devices. It's really not a problem in terms of device power to execute these models. So you
Mhm,
could do the prediction part. You could also do the preloading part
mhm,
parts,
mhm,
where you kind of in our case, our service worker then pulls in HTML cache entries before the user actually clicks. That gets you to where you don't have any network latency at all anymore,
mhm,
which is great.
mhm,
What you didn't have is pre-rendering because that is pretty new. Speculation rules with pre-rendering.
mhm,
This is definitely another performance boost if you can apply that.
mhm,
And on the other hand, the compression dictionaries, which delta encoding, which is kind of the research field behind this, and we have a PhD written right now about this topic as well, who's implementing all of this stuff in SpeedKit. This is quite old, but it never made the way into the browser until
mhm.
Pat Niemann actually took matters into his hands, as I've heard, and implemented this in Chrome. And yeah, now it's spreading, hopefully.
I need to reach out to Mr. I need to reach out to Patrick. It's been a while since I've seen him, let alone talk to him. And I could imagine I completely forgot. Because he's been talking about compression dictionaries for a little while now. And it's only right that, he would be the one to sort of like make some of these additions to the browser. Man, this has been fascinating. Again, I think this idea now is like, where can we make the changes to make things that much faster? And that it almost gets back to something that Tammy Everett had talked about during her stream, like how fast is fast? Like
Mhm.
we're trying to figure that out. Like I said, the way things have been moving, it's kind of like, man, like what is next? Like where are we going to be, say, in like I don't know, like 6 months, which is gonna I'm going to sort of like wrap this up with two questions that I think are very um, important here. My first question is, where do you see this project right now in, say, 6 months? That's the first question. And my second question is, and this is something that I asked the people over at Shopify last week. There's been a push for, or at least slowly and surely, we're seeing a few more agentic browsers, you know, and they talk about really taking control of what it is that you see, what you want. They'll make all these sort of like, you know, literally predictive suggestions. You know, has this come across your table? Not just, not that you're seeing people using it, but the idea of, could this be the next e-commerce experience? And how do you wrap yourself and your product like SpeedCake around that? Like, has that crossed your mind?
Right. Uh, second question first, maybe.
Yeah.
I personally find it so hard to predict this stuff because it's incredible the pace with which these changes are coming in is incredible. And on the other hand, I'm always switching between being completely amazed what generative AI models can do and being a bit um, underwhelmed at some points as well. What they cannot do and where they seem to fail to actually deliver what we expected to even have right now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I really can't say. My gut feeling is we're not moving towards completely agentic sales process because people really like to shop and to explore and to read about products and to be involved in the process of choosing and researching a product.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, maybe not for toilet paper, but um, for more pricier or more personal stuff for sure, like clothing, like electronics, and a bunch of other examples. So my gut feeling is it's not going to change that easily and that readily.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I agree with you. I just believe, I really believe that there's an element of browsing that gets overlooked. Like people just want to scroll like that.
Yeah.
That really does get overlooked, and I just don't think it's going to change overnight. So, but it is a conversation that's happening. They have, like I said, Comment and a few others that are coming out, and I'm just very curious because their adoption pace, say, of like ChatGPT has been like colossal.
Mhm.
And I wonder if this would happen as well if they officially release something like a browser client, and if people would just jump on it immediately, because, they might not care. And so that kind of crossed my mind. And in terms of back to the first question, like, where do you see this project of yours? First of all, does this project have a particular name? Because I just keep saying like RumML.
We call it predictive preloads.
Okay. So where do you see predictive preload, say, 6 months from now?
Our goal was always to get the majority of navigations below 300 milliseconds.
Okay.
If that is, I think, what is currently both achievable and really good sweet spot for if you're asking the question, what is optimal, what is good performance.
Mhm.
And I think we will be there in 6 months' time for most websites that we work with. There are a few challenges still, but we are mostly getting there, which I wouldn't have imagined 10 years ago for sure. We always said like the instant web is our kind of our big goal that we write over everything, like a startup does. But we are so much closer to being able to achieve something like that than I would have actually imagined, which
Yeah.
is an awesome feeling.
Yeah. And part of it, and congratulations on that, because it is kind of awesome that you're able to sort of like be able to now look at these possibilities. But I think also part of the things that we could not predict, say 10 years ago, are like browser features, adoption of some of these features, and some of these new products that come about, like what you're working with, are able to be or to come to light with the addition of service worker to start with,
Yeah.
with the addition of like pre-rendering, prefetching, preloading, and everything that's happened there over the years in the browser. So
Yeah.
I think we make decisions quite often with what we're presented at that time, and we can sort of like course correct or create new features based on that. So that's pretty awesome. Mr. Witt, man, thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. That was absolutely fascinating. um did I hear that you are or not going to be over at Perf now this year? You're not, right?
Oh no, this year, the first year that I have to skip since 2019. So unfortunate. I'm
No
really
sweat, no
really
sweat.
feel like I'm missing out. But I will
Yeah,
send a lot of our guys your way, and they will have a blast, I'm sure.
absolutely. And I'd love to hear about more of this rum meets ML, and if they have any particular updates. In closing, is there anything that you'd like to share real quick? If someone wants to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, that is a good question.
Without
I,
giving phone number.
yeah, I think I yeah, there wouldn't be a problem, but maybe even LinkedIn is one of the best ways, even though LinkedIn is really hard to not spam, but the recruiting
Yeah.
messages are a problem. But I think it's still currently the best way now that X is kind of falling apart for
Yeah.
most of us.
Yeah. It's like the whole space is like all just fragmented, it seems.
Yeah.
Cool. So LinkedIn it will be. I'll make sure to share that in the show notes. What I'll also do, I'll probably like ping you, maybe in an email. And if there's some links that you want to send our ways that I could put in the show notes as well, so people could kind of read up on it. And we'll definitely be in touch about a few other things that, some that I kind of tackled when we had our conversation. Folks, including Chris, thank you for sticking around. I'm glad you found that very interesting. I did as well. Folks, as usual, I'm going to have this episode sliced and diced up for next week, and it'll be ready to go. I'm looking forward to editing this. I'll create these little snippets as well. I think that you'll enjoy it because we had some great conversations here. Next week, I have to confirm it, but on my schedule, it looks like I may have the team responsible for a little library called Boomerang that was released quite some time ago. So I'm going to confirm that later on today, but I should be able to announce next week's speaker either by this evening or sometime tomorrow morning. It's going to be a good one, especially if you're into that rum conversation. That's going to be awesome. Thank you very much, as usual, for listening in or watching wherever you're at. And look out for the updates in the next few days with respect to next week. And we'll catch up. Cheers.